In 2022 in Birmingham, England, a retired machinist named Alan stood in his kitchen holding a brown pension letter beside an unpaid electric bill. He read the same sentence 3 times. Benefits adjusted to reflect current funding conditions. His monthly payment was being cut by 18%. Outside, nothing looked broken. The buses still ran. The supermarkets were open. Politicians still talked about stability, but inside Alan's house, the numbers stopped working. His heating bill had doubled in less than a year. Bread was up nearly 20%. Fuel was up more than 40%. He folded the pension letter, looked at the electric bill, and quietly told his wife they would have to cancel Christmas for the grandchildren. That is what retirement failure looks like in real life. Not a dramatic market crash. Not men screaming on a trading floor. A kitchen table. A calculator. A decision between heat and food. Most people believe their pension sits in a vault somewhere, protected, segregated, waiting for them. But in reality, many pensions are filled with government bonds, debt obligations, and return assumptions that no longer make mathematical sense. The fund says it needs 7% annual returns. The bonds inside it pay 2% or 3%. The gap is not a rounding error. The gap is your retirement. And here is the hidden rule almost nobody talks about. Governments benefit when pension funds buy government debt. Regulators call those bonds safe. Pension managers are rewarded for holding them. Politicians get cheaper financing. The retiree gets trapped last because the statement still arrives, the balance still appears on the screen, the monthly contribution still leaves the paycheck. Everything looks normal until one day a retired worker opens a letter and realizes the promise was never backed by cash, only by more debt. The account was full. The money was gone. In 2019, in Columbus, Ohio, a retired school administrator named Denise sat at her dining room table with a yellow legal pad, a pension statement, and a property tax bill that had jumped from $4,800 to $6,100 in 3 years. Her pension check still arrived every month. That was the reassuring part. The frightening part was that everything around it was moving faster than the check itself. Insurance premiums were up. Groceries were up. Her prescription refill for blood pressure medication had gone from $38 to $71. She found herself standing in a supermarket aisle, putting a bag of oranges back because they cost $8.49. The pension had not collapsed. Her life had. That is how the guarantee myth survives. People think retirement fails all at once, like a bank run or a stock market crash. Usually it fails slowly. One tax increase, one medical bill, one rent increase for an adult child who moves back home, one winter heating bill. The statement still says $620,000. The monthly deposit still lands in the checking account. The number stayed the same. The purchasing power disappeared. And underneath that quiet decline is a hidden mechanism most retirees never see. Large pension funds are often required by law or regulation to hold huge amounts of sovereign debt. Government bonds are treated as risk-free for accounting purposes, even when the country issuing them is buried under trillions in debt. That creates a strange contradiction. The more indebted a government becomes, the more retirement systems are encouraged to lend it even more money. In theory, the bonds make the pension safer. In reality, they make the pension more dependent on the one institution most likely to change the rules. In 2023, the average public pension plan in the United States still assumed annual returns near 7%, but long-term government bonds often yielded closer to 3% or 4%. That missing 3% is not a technical detail. It is the difference between retiring at 65 and working until 72. It is the difference between keeping the house and selling it. It is one transmission repair, one roof leak, one emergency room visit. A retired couple in New Jersey can lose $12,000 a year just from higher property taxes, utilities, and Medicare premiums. That is before food. That is before gasoline. That is before helping a grandchild with daycare. For years, people are told their pension is guaranteed because the check still arrives. But a guaranteed check is not the same thing as a guaranteed life. The hidden question is not whether the money shows up. The hidden question is what the money can still buy. In 2010 in Budapest, a 54-year-old engineer named Laszlo stood in line at a government office holding a blue pension folder and a number ticket. The room was quiet. No shouting, no panic, just fluorescent lights, plastic chairs, and people staring at the floor. Hungary was facing a debt crisis. The government needed money fast. Officials presented it as a temporary fix, a patriotic necessity, a way to stabilize the country. Citizens with private pension accounts were given a choice. Keep your private retirement savings and lose your right to the state pension. or surrender your private pension assets back to the government and keep the state benefit. That was the choice, not because the investments had failed, not because the workers had made bad decisions, because the state needed the money. Around $14 billion in private pension assets was absorbed into government hands in a matter of months. Years of savings. Redirected. The official language was calm, national stability, fiscal reform, long-term sustainability, but inside apartments across Budapest, the experience felt very different. A couple in District 13 sat at a kitchen table with two pension statements, trying to calculate which option was less dangerous. A widow folded her late husband's account documents into a drawer because she no longer believed they meant anything. A factory worker nearing retirement looked at his watch, looked at the government forms, and realized he did not own what he thought he owned. That is the hidden rule. When governments become desperate enough, retirement assets stop being your future and start becoming their funding source. And Hungary was not unique because it happened. Hungary matters because it happened legally. That is the part most people miss. There were no tanks in the street, no bank holiday, no midnight confiscation. There was paperwork. There was a deadline. There was a signature line at the bottom of the page. People still went to work. Cafes stayed open. Trains still ran on time. Outside, normal life continued. Inside, the ownership structure of retirement savings had changed completely. That is why sovereign debt is different from ordinary market risk. A stock can fall 40%. A house can lose value. But sovereign debt carries a second danger. The same institution that owes the money also writes the rules. Belief versus reality. People think government bonds are safe because governments do not go bankrupt in the traditional sense. But governments have another option. They can change the retirement age. They can raise contribution rates. They can cut benefits by 10%, then 15%, then 20%. They can tax withdrawals. They can force pension funds to buy more government debt. They can redefine what guaranteed means. One law, one signature, 20 years of savings. Gone. In 2024 in Sacramento, a pension fund board sat around a polished conference table voting to increase its allocation to government bonds. The room overlooked the city skyline. Coffee cups, PowerPoint slides, actuaries in dark suits explaining liability matching and risk reduction. Outside that building, a 67-year-old retired electrician named Robert was standing in line at a discount grocery store with a gallon of milk, a prescription bottle, and a pack of frozen chicken thighs in his cart. The board called the bonds safe. Robert called them useless. His pension check had increased by 2%. His grocery bill was up 11%. His Medicare premiums had risen from $170 a month to over $240. His homeowner's insurance jumped another $900 for the year. He had stopped driving to visit his daughter every weekend because gasoline was too expensive. The pension system considered him whole. He did not. That is the deeper trap. Retirement funds are not always free to invest where returns are highest. They are often pushed by regulations, accounting rules, and political pressure to buy the debt governments issue. Why? Because governments need buyers. In many cases, sovereign bonds receive favorable treatment on pension balance sheets. They require less capital. They are considered lower risk. They help managers avoid blame if markets fall. If a pension manager buys government debt and returns are weak, nobody goes to jail. Nobody loses their license. They followed the rules. But if they take more risk, underperform, and the market turns against them, they become the villain. So the system quietly rewards institutional self-protection over retiree protection. That is the contradiction. The people managing your retirement are often incentivized to protect themselves first. The retiree comes second. And when the numbers stop working, the easiest solution is rarely to admit the assumptions were wrong. It is to change the promise. In 2023, several public pension systems still assumed long-term returns of 7%, even though many of the bonds they held yielded less than 4%. That gap gets filled somewhere, usually by taxpayers, sometimes by younger workers paying higher contribution rates, often by retirees themselves through smaller cost of living increases, delayed retirement ages, or lower future benefits. A teacher works until 68 instead of 63. A city worker contributes 11% of each paycheck instead of 6%. A retired couple cuts their thermostat to 61 degrees in January and wears winter coats inside the house. One electric bill. One skipped dental visit. One postponed car repair. That is how a pension crisis appears before anyone officially calls it a crisis. The people closest to the system begin acting poorer long before the headlines admit anything is wrong. In 2021, in Dayton, Ohio, a retired auto worker named Thomas sat in his garage staring at a red toolbox he had owned for 32 years. He had planned to give it to his grandson. Instead, he was deciding whether to sell it. 3 months earlier, Thomas had received a pension adjustment letter. His monthly benefit was falling from $3,200 to just over $2,200, almost 30%. The letter blamed funding pressures and revised return assumptions. Thomas read those words while sitting at the kitchen table with his wife. Neither of them understood what the language meant. They understood what the numbers meant. The mortgage still had 7 years left. Their property tax bill had climbed to $5,400 a year. His wife's arthritis medication cost $490 a month, even after insurance. Their pickup truck needed a new transmission. One number changed on one pension letter, and suddenly every object in the house became a financial decision. The truck, the toolbox, the wedding ring, the second refrigerator in the garage. That is what people miss about retirement cuts. The first loss is financial. The second loss is dignity. Thomas had done everything correctly. He worked overtime. He skipped vacations. He never gambled. He paid into the system for 4 decades. He thought discipline was the contract. Then he discovered the real contract was based on assumptions. The pension fund had projected long-term returns near 7.5%. Reality delivered closer to 4%. That gap does not stay inside a spreadsheet. It moves into someone's kitchen. And it usually arrives when people are least able to recover. At 35, you can work another job. At 45, you can move cities. At 68, with a bad knee, a paid-off house that still carries taxes, and a wife who needs medication, your options become brutally narrow. That is who gets trapped first, not the reckless, not the irresponsible. The responsible person who planned around a promise that changed after they were too old to rebuild. And there is another reason this keeps happening. Most financial advisors are not rewarded for warning people about sovereign debt exposure inside pensions. They are rewarded for keeping clients calm. Stay diversified. Stay invested. Think long-term. Those phrases sound reassuring because they work in normal markets. But sovereign debt is different. The referee is also a player in the game. The institution owing the money controls the accounting rules, the retirement age, the inflation calculation, the tax treatment, and sometimes even the definition of default. That is why a pension can avoid collapse on paper while failing completely in real life. The check still arrives. The retiree still loses the house. The account was full. The future was gone. The system is difficult to fix because the people writing the rules depend on the weakness continuing. Governments need buyers for their debt. Pension funds need optimistic assumptions to avoid admitting losses. Politicians need the appearance of stability. And ordinary people need to believe the promise is still intact, because the alternative is too frightening to confront. That is why the pressure keeps building quietly. No dramatic announcement, no siren, just smaller cost of living adjustments. Higher retirement ages, more taxes, lower purchasing power, more years of work for less security. The people who get trapped are usually the ones who confuse access with ownership. They have a large pension statement but no cash reserves, a large retirement account but no tangible assets, a paid-off house but rising taxes they cannot afford, a monthly check that still arrives but no flexibility when groceries, insurance, fuel, and medication all rise at the same time. The people who adapt tend to look less impressive on paper, but they have options. They know how much of their retirement is exposed to sovereign debt. They understand who legally controls their assets. They keep some liquidity outside the system. They reduce dependence on any one institution, any one policy, any one promise. Because real retirement security is not about having the biggest number. It is about having usable wealth when the rules change. That is the difference. Nominal wealth is a statement balance. Usable wealth is the ability to pay the property tax bill, replace the furnace, buy the groceries, cover the prescription, and stay in your home without asking permission. One pension check, one grocery receipt, one property tax bill. That is where the truth shows up. If you want to protect yourself, start by auditing your retirement accounts for sovereign debt exposure, unrealistic return assumptions, and legal restrictions on access. Then look at what you can move under more direct control. Cash reserves, self-directed accounts, tangible assets, flexible income, fewer fixed obligations. Because in the end, the people who survive these periods are not the people who trusted the promise. They are the people who prepared for the possibility that the promise would change. And somewhere tonight, someone is standing at a kitchen counter holding a pension statement in one hand and an electric bill in the other, realizing that the account is still full. But the money no longer works.